Mr. Rainwater.
Hey there, Joe.
I know I have to believe that, much like myself, whenever you watch a movie or a TV show or you read a book, whatever it may be, some kind of storytelling artistic piece,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a reaction to it, after the reaction usually comes the self-introspection part for an
Right.
artist, where you question, why am I reacting to this? What about that? Like, you start digging, like, what about this is hitting me? What's speaking to me about this piece? We both have been very busy this past month, and we have not been able to record. So we're not going out of October without having one spooky podcast.
Right?
So today, I'm curious to know from you, what scares you? Like, what's the last time you were watching something and you were legitimately like bothered, like it just like
Yeah.
horrified, scared, like, what
Yeah.
really got underneath your skin in a scary kind of way?
Well, it's interesting because, like, all right. So recently, last 2 weeks, I went on a trip to Michigan and spent a lot of time with friends of the show, Matt and Aaron. And during my time up there in Michigan, we had a chance to go to a drive-in theater, and so we went and saw a double feature. And
Nice.
it was a horror movie double feature
Okay.
of Smile and Jeepers Creepers, like 4 or 5 or something like that. Okay.
The reboot? Was it the
I think
reboot
it's
or
the reboot. I've never watched the Jeepers Creepers movie until that one.
what was the
So,
rough premise of it?
um, good question. What happened? What the fuck happened in that movie? Okay, there's the Jeepers Creepers dude who's like this winged crow monster, and he throws people down tubes, and
That's a general
yeah,
that's a general Jeepers Creepers
he
description.
likes to play a phonograph when he like kills people, and there was something about like one of the main characters is like was like pregnant with like a monster baby or something. I don't know. Yeah, I don't
Okay,
know.
that's either got to be Jeepers Creepers 3 or the reboot. I don't know which one
I
is
guess
which.
well, I think it was the reboot. It was the most recent one. It's
Okay,
like
that's
the new.
got to be, yeah, that's got to be the reboot. I know the third one was technically recent. I think it was within the last year and a half or so, maybe. I don't know. Fucking COVID fucked with my head, but
That
anyway.
wasn't the movie that had a moment that bothered me. The movie that had a moment that bothered me was actually in Smile, which was an overall okay movie. Um, but there's a moment in the movie that actually like really bothered me, and I was like, oh, that's actually like freaky. And it's the main character attends a birthday party for their nephew, in like they're opening up, like her nephew is opening up presents, and like finally gets to her present, and within the story up to that point, like there's sort of, you find out kind of slowly that there's this curse, and she's apparently we haven't figured out whether or not she's received the curse yet, but we
Okay.
suspect. And the nephew opens the box, and I'm not going to say what it is because it's actually sort of plot centric, but it's basically like a really horrible thing. Like it's like
Okay.
imagine a severed head or something like that.
Sure.
And our main character is suddenly having this revelation, like, I didn't do that. What the hell's going on? And what was scary about that was this moment of like, because the movie's mostly about like, one of the central premises in the movie is like mental health, right? Because the main character is like a psychologist or psychiatrist, and she's beginning to think that maybe she's losing her mind because she had this experience where she saw somebody else lose her mind, and like she may have this curse and all this other stuff. And it's this moment of like reality's sort of shifted, and she's in this situation where she's surrounded by family and friends of her family,
Yeah.
and they're all seeing her like give this horrifying gift. and she's like pleading like, no, it's not me, I didn't do this. Like, it was actually like a really oddly disturbing moment, because I think what was disturbing about it to me was the idea of like doing something occurring that's so distinctly separate from the reality that you experience, where you question your own reality. Like, that kind of stuff freaks me out a little
Oh, you're
bit.
gonna like haunted shit.
Like, that kind of stuff like is like gets under my skin, because it's I think because I like to think that I have like a good grasp on reality, and so the idea of like that whole notion of my grasp of reality being sort of turned upside down,
Mm.
right? Like, that is kind of freaky. That is like one of those. I say, as somebody who's done hallucinogens, right? Which is totally a way, if you want to have an interaction with that sort of freaky space, that's a great way to do that. Having been in that space, it's easy with hallucinogens because eventually it's going to pass. But the idea that it wouldn't pass, like the idea of, which this is sort of a central theme in Smile, like the idea of being, like having a kind of mental illness where there's not another side to it, right? Like,
Mm.
you're just going further into that rabbit hole. That's kind of scary. And it's the
Yeah.
same kind of scary of like, getting a terminal illness, or like, granted, like you can have a terminal illness and retain your mental clarity, but the idea of losing your mental clarity, that scares me. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Like when I was a teenager, I learned about like what Alzheimer's was, and that like freaked me the fuck out, because I was like, oh, holy shit, like what would that even be like to experience your life where you're unraveling, and like you don't even remember everything, like you're
Yeah.
just losing everything. Like, that kind of stuff freaks me out. So anyway, enough on me rambling about that. I'm curious for you, Jow, like what is it for you that what kind of shit gets under your skin?
Well, I seem to find situations, and it's very hard for me to kind of pinpoint this down, but the way I would describe it as social, or like inescapable persecution.
Yeah, that's freaky for sure.
So like there's a moment, I think it's like Halloween 4 or 5. It's one of those like middle of the road Halloween movies. Um Not very good movies, right? You can pick and choose or whatever like that.
Sure.
But there's a moment in one of them, I think it's 5, where I think the lead girl and her sister and like the cop or whatever like that are like in a car, and all of a sudden they pull up in the middle of a road and they see Michael Myers standing on the side of a house. And that's par for the course for a Halloween movie. But there's 3 or 4 characters in the car, and one of them is looking at Michael Myers, and they're like, there he is. And another person in the car is looking in another direction, and they go, yeah, what's he doing over there? And then you look, and there's another Michael Myers over there, and there's another Michael Myers over there, and there's another Michael Myers over there. Like, there's a fucking social surrounding of them. And that to me freaks me out. That idea of like there's no escape, everybody has turned against you.
Yeah.
Things like not necessarily the what's it called, the Nicolas Cage version, but the Wicker Man. I don't know if
Sure.
you've seen the original. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? Where like an entire group of people. Have you ever seen Midsummer?
Yeah, yeah.
That movie got under my skin. You know what I mean? Like you're surrounded by people, you are outnumbered. The idea of the numbers being against you gets under my skin quite a bit. Like that's, I don't know what it is about that, but I have a complete in a lack of faith in the ability of the one to overcome the many. Maybe that's a
Sure.
cynical thing of me,
No, I
but
get what you're saying. Like, they're definitely. I mean, I think that was something that was scary for a lot of different people during the last, like, probably last 4 years, because there were in multiple, like from multiple political spectrums and in multiple different angles, there were several occurrences where people found themselves in positions where they were the odd person out, like
Sure.
either politically in a situation or just on the street and getting caught in the middle of like a protest or a riot or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a terrifying situation to be in because you don't know, like you either have to just pretend you're part of the crowd, which is on a certain level, like you basically have to shed your integrity as a person to survive, which I've done. I've been in that kind of situation before in my life in multiple venues, and it leaves kind of a weird emotional mark, where
Yes.
it's like, oh, I had to pretend to basically survive in a sense, like,
Yeah.
or
Well,
to,
that's just survival in general, but after a
yeah,
while, it can be caustic on your
yeah,
mental health, your soul. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. I don't know if it scares me though. You know what I mean? Like it bothers me,
yeah,
but the idea of like fear to me, like the definition of like something to be to scared of or afraid of or to horrify you is just something that you see no plausible way of overcoming.
sure,
You
yeah.
know what I mean?
I
Like a
did
lot
that
of I
last.
can
Go ahead.
I was gonna say like I can look at a lot of problems like the one you
Yeah,
just described and where I could be like, you know what, fuck it, I am just gonna tell this person my real political point of view, and if they don't like it, step off,
yeah,
bitch,
yeah,
and that's the end of it. Whereas, if 20 people are coming at me with pitchforks and torches and a hive of bees that they're gonna dump on my head, then that's a different situation because I
yeah,
don't know how I'm getting out. Like just this afternoon, I watched the last drive-in first episode from the recent Halloween special they did with it was an Elvira movie, Elvira's Haunted Hills. So it's like really cheesy and over the top. But
yeah.
in the opening of the movie, it starts with her having a nightmare where she's chained to a wall and getting bricked up in front of it, where she's just going to be stuck behind this brick wall, chained up or whatever. That's fucking nightmare fuel to me. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, that's
Like
I mean, I'm sure that was borrowed from Cask of Amontillado because that was how that story
probably.
went, right? And I remember reading that story when I was in high school and being like, oh, that's actually kind of a scary story. Like, um, yeah, like you're saying, that idea of just like the inevitable, right? Which is why death is the big fear for everybody because it's
Right.
fucking inevitable for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Like I did that. I had that occur last night before I was going to bed, where I was just like kind of in that zone of my mind wandering around, and then I started wandering. It wandered into like thinking about the moment of death, like what is that moment like,
Mm.
and that is one of those things where like when the mind encounters it, it's immediately like it's freak out territory because you can't really imagine it. The closest thing you can often imagine is just like sudden darkness, right? That may or may not be forever.
Yeah.
That idea is like you can never prepare for it, right? And I think that's part of what makes a lot of stuff like that very effective in producing fear is for stuff you can't even necessarily imagine or properly prepare for. Like there's
Right.
your brain hits these moments of just like um I guess paradox or whatever. I feel like there's like a logical aspect to what makes fear what it is, basically.
Well, I mean that's one of the reasons why jump scares are so effective, right? Is because they happen so fast. Your mind immediately thinks, "Oh, I have no time to prepare. I have no time to react. I have no ability here for safety." You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
nothing I can do. It's already happened. I wasn't paying enough attention. It wasn't, the circumstances weren't working in my favor. That's what jump scares do. That's why, when it happens in a movie, that's why it scares the shit out of you. When you do it in like something like a haunt, right? That then it starts becoming par for the course. It's
Yeah.
gonna be my phrase for this episode. But like I've noticed that I've gone on like a haunt that's like 45 minutes to an hour, right? And after the first or second jump scare, you get used to knowing there's gonna be a guy around the corner in a Halloween mask that's gonna go and jump out at you, and you
Yeah.
just kind of your body acclimates, and it's not scary anymore. That's the wonderful thing about movies, though, is that if they do it right, that is, they have those ebbs and flows. Like they'll do a jump scare, but then they'll do like a comedy scene or a romance scene, or like an action scene or a drama scene or something to change up your expectation of what's coming, and then they'll throw another jump scare at you, and
Yeah.
that's when it catches you off guard and you weren't able to prepare. Um, so I'm curious. Okay, so we talking about stories a little bit. Is there any particular, or like when I say stories, I mean like movies or books or whatever like that? I'm curious to know in real life what's like the scariest thing that's maybe happened to you. Like what scared you in real life?
Oh, I
With
mean,
the exception of stuff like, let's not get too morose here, like, oh, my family or family member had cancer or something like that. Something more fun, I guess, is the
I don't know
apt
if I
way to
have any. I
describe it.
don't know if I have any fun things that scared me. No, I mean, as a child, I was scared to death of heights. I
Hmm.
really like that was a thing that scared the hell out of me. And then, like, I don't know. I guess the things I think, the other stuff that I think about the most, X Files was really popular in the 90s, and my dad watched the hell out of X Files. And so I slowly became more and more terrified of being abducted by aliens. Um, and I remember having a hard time getting to sleep because I would keep looking out the window to make sure, like, they're not, fucking creeping in or whatever.
Um,
Th- There's another episode of X Files that fucked me up as a kid, and it's the one with he was like they find like this lamprey man, like this guy who lives in the sewers and shit. And like he would get into like toilet stalls, like like the what do you call them? The porta potties and shit, and like
oh,
rape
okay.
people,
Yeah.
and like come out of like somehow come out of like out of fucking toilets and stuff. Freaked me out as a kid. I had the hardest time using the toilet for like a solid year because I would just like I would think about like what could come out of that toilet, because you also hear stories, real life stories about like snakes and rats and stuff coming out of the toilet.
Sure.
Like that has always even now that still kind of bothers me if like if I use a toilet like at a campground or something. In the back of my head, I'm just like, what the fuck could come crawling out of the toilet?
I'm always thinking about that when I'm like in the woods. Like if I have to
Yeah.
take a leak and I'm taking a piss or whatever, if I'm pissing into like a pile of leaves, part of me is always thinking in the back of my head, there could be a snake blending in with these leaves and he's about to
Yeah.
jump out and bite my dick.
Yeah.
And that is always in the back of my mind when I'm like exposed in the middle of something like
Yeah.
that. It's funny that you bring up like a childhood trauma because it's so weird. But some of the things that scared me as a kid, I went back and watched, and I'm like, boy, I was a dumb fucking kid. There was a movie. I don't know if this was before or after. I want to say it was probably after Blair Witch Project. It was a movie. It struck me when you said the thing about aliens and X Files. There's a movie called Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County.
Okay.
Now, it was a Blair Witch style UFO abduction movie, and it was shot held handheld camera and all this stuff, and it was about a kid on Thanksgiving with his family in the middle of like their farm in the middle of nowhere, and like aliens land, and they're like lasering their cows, and then they shut off all the power in the farm, and then they break into the house, and like there's a lot of camera work going around in the dark, and then like he's trapped in a room and it's completely dark, and like an alien is like bumps right into the camera, and you see like the face, like freaked me the fuck out as a kid. As a kid. Now, because of nostalgia, I was like, oh, I gotta go back and watch this.
Yeah.
Man, it's so bad. The acting and writing, like it's literally one of those things where, so it's like Thanksgiving, and like the sister brought her new boyfriend over, and
Mm.
he's black, right? So of course the white farmer family or whatever is racist, and like they get into an argument with him or whatever, and it's one of those situations where he looks at him and he goes, "Why do I think you want to call me something else?" And I'm just sitting myself going, "Jesus Christ!" The acting and dialogue is so bad in this. But there was other parts of it that were like really engaging, like the kid pisses himself, and like he look pants down and it's like he's pissed his pants and like that's the situation that they have to deal with. And like it's okay, don't worry, you're just nervous. Like, and like I'm watching some of this stuff and I was like, boy, that really does blend in the realism on there. And I think that's another aspect that really needs to be
I
considered when it
had
comes to
that.
horror.
I had that with the movie Fire in the Sky. Have you ever seen that one?
I've not seen
It's
that movie. I've heard of it, but
yeah.
it's been on my list. I didn't know if it was a horror movie or if it was more
It's more of
sci-fi.
a the way it's sci-fi kind of, but they sort of try and do it as like a biographical story because
Okay.
it's based on like a real life testimony of an alien abduction.
Huh.
And I remember watching the only scene as a kid I watched was the alien abduction scene, which is like actually still kind of freaky even now. They actually do a pretty decent job with it. It's but as a kid, I mean, it's like as a kid versus as an adult, what freaks you out, it works differently, right? Like
Yeah.
something I was thinking about was there's plenty of things that I'm scared of nowadays as an adult, but the way that I deal with that is different, right? Like if I'm walking on the side of a busy street, like I'm terrified of like a car just like somebody loses control and the car veers in, head on into me. Because that's something in the back of my head is like, oh, that's a possibility,
All right. Yeah.
Uh nuclear war is a possibility, That kind of
See,
shit freaks me out.
see, that
But
doesn't freak me out because I think either A, I'm going out immediately, or B, my brain has already walked through the, okay, we would go here in the house. This is the first thing I would do is make sure that we dump out these tubs and fill them with water. This one's a poop tub. This one's the drinking tub. Nick gets all of the calorie dense things first. Like my
yeah.
brain has come up with the apocalypse scenario to get through it. So that type of stuff never bothers me anymore.
I think, and then the stuff, and then there's stuff that happens in real life that freaks you out, and then you just have to live with it, and it's like a flood, like that was something that was in the past. I've thought about what it would be like being in a flood and not like imagining it and not feeling freaked out about it, and then when it actually happens, it's actually like kind of scary, even if it's not
Sure.
that immediately dangerous.
Yeah.
Watching water rise in your home or just start slushing into your house,
Yeah.
it's very surreal because you're like, that's not supposed to happen. And then things that you don't expect to happen, like sewage water coming up from your toilet or from the bathtub, because it just goes up through all the pipes.
Yeah.
And those things you never think about suddenly happening, you're like, oh shit, this is reality. Like this is happening.
Yeah, like the
Uh,
second story of a house is starting to flood. You're like, wait a minute, that's not supposed to happen at all.
yeah, like stuff like that is so I mean, there's what also creates fear is that sort of um encounter with the parts of reality that we usually don't encounter, right? Like being attacked by a wild animal, that's another one that's like pretty freaky, and it doesn't happen. It's freaky because it doesn't happen that often. There was a period in time in human history where it happened all the time,
Right.
and that
Yeah.
was just like life. But did you have something to say, Joe? Because
No,
it's
I
like,
was just gonna say that's another nightmare scenario that I've already mentally worked out what I would
yeah,
do. Like if it's a bear, I'm fucking running. Like that's the number one thing. But like I've thought about how would I fight off a wolf,
hmm
and I wrestle with my dog enough that I've kind of figured out how a canine type animal will attack and how to beat them. like,
but wolves,
like,
as far as I understand, wolves pretty much work mostly in packs, so it's sort of
yeah, that's the differing equation. But I mean,
yeah.
here's the thing though, and this is me with my martial arts background is I know that all you need to do is punch something in the throat once for it to
Mhm.
swell inwards and suffocate them. So the first thing I'm fucking doing is I'm grabbing one of them and I'm punching it in the throat, and then I'm turning to the next one, punching it in the throat, turning to
Yeah.
the next one, punching it in the throat. That's gonna be the fucking style of fight I'm going with. And you know what I mean? Like if you don't have any alternatives, like
Yeah.
that's what you do. So that's where my brain goes. Like I watch, and that's the weird fucking part about me is I think about shit like this when I'm bored. Like, what would I do in that situation? Like, well, how would I fight off a pack of wolves? How would I survive a nuclear blast? And then, the next thing I know, I'm Googling, how far, what do you do, da 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 da, and I look at other scenarios and stuff. So, like, I'm by no means a prepper, right? Those people who are constantly making sure they have like some escape plan and some crazy shit
Sure.
like that. But I do always make sure that there's like two extra cases of bottled water in the house, and that
Sure.
there's a fair amount of not canned goods, but things that could last you for a little while. You know what I mean? Like that are readily available
Yeah.
at the house. So like the pantry kind of stays stocked with that, and I rotate it every now and then. But like it's one of those things where it's like, well, if you had told me in 2019, hey, the world's going to shut down for 2 years, like entirely. You're not going to work. No one's going to work. Like everybody's going to be freaked out and hiding in their houses and da da
Yeah.
da da. I would have said that can never happen. If you had told me in, August of 2001, hey, a couple people are going to take some planes and fly them into skyscrapers, I would have looked at you like your head was on backwards and oh, that doesn't happen. Like, you know what I mean? So the idea that things can happen I think is part of becoming an adult, right? They tell you that like as you grow up, you get less afraid of things, but that's not necessarily true. It's the things that you get afraid of change into the more plausible of things. Like
Yeah.
you're no longer afraid of a vampire or zombies, but you are afraid of a nuclear bomb dropping
Well,
or
fear, yeah, fear transforms into anxiety, which is sort of like, um, in a sense, it's productive fear, right? Because like
yeah,
what you were talking about earlier about all of the preparation scenarios that you do in your mind, like that's anxiety, right? That's like you start imagining it and wondering what you would do in that situation. You kind of play it over and over and over in your head.
mm,
And that's certainly like the biological um, good part of it, right? And then you have people like I know that for me, I've talked about this in the show before. Like I sometimes suffer a little bit from like what is sort of like a prolonged anxiety where I'm just ruminating on stuff. And so I'm playing the loops over and over again to the point where I'm like, why am I still playing this? Like I've
yeah,
gone over this. Why am I going over this again and again and again? That's when it can become unproductive because then it's just, it's the Batman Begins DVD playing over and over again until except it never burns out. You can't burn it out.
shots fired at me. No, like I get it. Like, and I think that comes from, a weird business mindset that's been drilled into humanity, where it's like you can't make mistakes because mistakes cost money,
Yeah.
and mistakes, a loss of money means I don't know, like a loss of resources, a loss of
Yeah.
time, a loss of a lot of things.
Right.
So,
Right.
that there's a minimization to that. So that kind of gets drilled into the habits of adults where it's like you cannot get this wrong at all. And as you pointed out, the the reanalyzation of things after it has been properly analyzed is equally unproductive and detrimental, right? To
Yeah.
actual success. So it's like one of those things where you do have to try, and this is one of the things that I drill about and try and drill into my brain at all times these days is that the key to everything in life is balance. Balance
Yeah.
between, you know, light and dark, good and bad, uh, work and play. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you need to find that balance in everything, whether it's the food you eat, like how healthy you eat or how junky you eat. Sometimes you need to stay up a little later and work on something. Sometimes you just need to go to bed.
Yep.
Sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, there's a balance that needs to be found. So, I think once people do that, you can really start kind of eliminating fear in your mind. So, like, I think that's really what it comes in with those nightmare scenarios where it's like, all right, I'm afraid that a nuclear bomb might be dropped on us by Putin. Where would he drop it? Probably New York City. How far am I from New York City? What does an atom bomb do from New York City to where I am? Like, you
Right.
start doing that research or whatever, and it kind of, the balance part of that is doing some research and figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to have be kind of prepared for this situation? And then the other part about it is, not worrying about it anymore, letting it go.
Well,
You know what I mean?
yeah. At a certain point, you really can't worry about it. I mean, I when I lived on the West Coast, the thing that people always talk about at some point during the year, especially during the summer, is the big one, right? The big earthquake. So like in Oregon, there is what is called the Cascadia subduction zone, and it's been due for like a huge like 9 point sort of mega quake.
Wow.
And I remember living in Portland, hearing people describe the horrors of what would happen in an earthquake like that, and just like I had a good year where I kind of felt like horrified constantly because it's like it could just happen at any time. And then at a certain point, it's like it kind of wore off because at a certain point, it's like, well, there's nothing I can do if it happens. Like there's literally you just
Yeah.
pray that you somehow make it through if you do. Um, but there are tons of things like that in the entire universe, right? Like the people talk about solar flares affecting or impacting like the electric grid of the entire earth, right? And we could just within the swoop of a couple of moments be plunged back into sort of not necessarily prehistoric, but like into be kicked back a couple millennium by the sun if it wanted to. There's all kinds of things that could just destroy us
Yeah.
at any given moment. And
Asteroids.
yep, asteroids. That's another one. That's one that I kind of think about every once in a while. That kind of makes me feel uncomfortable.
Well, I think
There's
what makes me most uncomfortable about asteroids is, and I ask myself this every time I examine that nightmare scenario, um, would they even bother to tell us?
right.
If you
That's
can't
the
do
one that
anything
I
about it,
I
like they would just be like, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so let's just not tell anybody because otherwise we're just gonna plunge into chaos anyway. Um, so I don't. That's why I kind of operate my life these days, where it's like, well, I could go tomorrow. Like they say that like, oh, you could have a heart attack. I think you're more likely when you're younger, at least, that the asteroid will hit than you'll have a heart attack or something. But the fact of the matter is that it is insane how many existential threats we face and survive on a
yeah, every
daily
day,
basis.
all the time. Yeah.
Like, if you think about the probability of Earth in space, how much is unknown about space, and how much there is at least that we know about in space, the probability of the Earth not being hit by an asteroid is fucking insane that we aren't getting pummeled with them constantly. So, and I know most of them are small enough that they get broken up in the atmosphere, but eventually one's going to come along
Yeah.
where they're just going to be like, we got to either Armageddon this shit or uh, everybody just go out and live your wildest fantasies for the next 42 hours and,
The
call
planet
it
Earth is in a good spot thanks to the planet Jupiter. Jupiter's so fucking big, it just kind of
like a
hoovers.
shield.
Yeah, it hoovers up most of the comets and asteroids that would impact
But isn't it
much
a
of it.
gas giant?
Yeah, it's a gas giant, but it's
So doesn't that
giant.
mean, but doesn't, so what is it, like the gravitational pull just sucks it all in? Because it wouldn't be hitting
Yeah,
anything. It'd just
it's the
be,
gravitational well of the planet Jupiter. Now, granted, I mean, there's tons of shit that gets past Jupiter all the time. I mean, the big one that it gets talked about all the time is the asteroid Apophis, and that one is supposed to be due to pass near Earth orbit. I want to say, I hope maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was 2028 or something like that. But that's the one that like I remember people talking about all the time because like that's the one that if it had any chance of like impacting Earth, that would be the one. And it's
that would,
like it's supposed to pass. Oh yeah, it's supposed to pass near Earth in 2029.
that
Uh,
would piss me off because that would be shortly after I paid off my college loans.
oh no.
When I'm finally available to afford things again.
So it's supposed to pass 800 meters, like near the gravitational keyhole that would determine whether or not it impacts Earth. So like it's
Wow.
extremely close. and on a cosmic scale.
Well, we need to get Bruce Willis on this.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing too is you do wonder, well, would they tell us something's gonna hit? They would you also wonder is would they even tell you if they were doing something to stop it? You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't they
Yeah.
just do like a top secret mission, like a Bruce Willis Armageddon type scenario, where it's like, hey, this was gonna happen, but it's not anymore because we did this and now it's done.
I don't know
So,
what to think anymore now that like NASA is starting to like do investigations into unidentified aerial phenomena. I'm
well,
like,
there's a lot of that stuff too, and you gotta see, and the conspiracy tinfoil hat person in me likes to say, why are we so obsessed with going to Mars? What's so fucking great about living on Mars? What, like, and part of me is starting to think they know something's up about here that we're, like, not just climate change or like, the threat of asteroids, but, like, they know something's going down. And they're like, shit, we gotta get the fuck out of here. And they're just not telling us why. Um, but I think about that. So like if I, and it's weird to me if NASA is investigating unexplained aerial phenomenon because you would think they'd been doing that since the beginning of NASA, right?
yeah,
Isn't that kind of the point of NASA is to explore everything outside of us? And if it's coming from outside and coming into us, we would check that shit out.
yeah,
Like,
you'd think they would have noticed already.
yeah. Well, I mean, well, there's a lot of people that think, oh, it's just the crazy people with the UFO stuff and all that. But, there's so much stuff that's been uncovered and talked about. At this point in time, I don't think any of it's not real. You know what I mean? Like, there's obviously hoaxes and stuff like that where people are just trying to get attention or whatever. But I think that there's a very real possibility of, people seeing things. But then you also have to wonder how much of it is military shit and all that kind of,
That's usually, yeah. You have to apply Occam's razor to all that stuff and just like and kind of go into, okay, what is the most likely thing that it
right.
is?
Yeah.
But getting back to sort of, sorry, I derailed it totally in that little side tangent, but like, uh, I, the fear, right, feeds off of all those kinds of questions.
Mm.
Fear thrives in questions, right?
In the
And like,
unknown.
yeah, and like making a good scary story, I think, sort of starts with having a set of questions that are difficult to answer.
Right.
Um, and the more difficult those questions are to answer, or even if you can find questions that are unanswerable, right? That makes it that can make it more impactful in terms of good storytelling. You know.
Well, I mean, that you look at some of the most classic horror movies, and the unknown is the key to what makes all of them so classic. Like you look at
Yeah.
the original Halloween, right? Michael Myers, nobody knows why he's killing people. It's not until like the sequels that they start saying, "Oh, it's his sister. Oh,
Yeah.
it's this reason, the cult of Thorn and all this other kind of crazy shit." Once they start explaining it, it stops becoming scary. Freddy Krueger. Well, how the fuck do you defeat a dream demon? I've never heard of this before. Like, what do? You can't. You have to sleep. There's no avoiding
Yeah.
that. Um, Jason Voorhees. I don't know what the real kicker of him is. He is more so I guess how he's just unstoppable, and what's the existential threat of being in the woods. I guess.
Yeah.
Scream. A masked killer is able to conceal every aspect of their personality and is going around, killing people, and no one has any clue about who it could possibly be. There's the unknown there. You know what I mean? Like you start looking at The Exorcist, right? Is this little girl mentally ill, or is this the devil? Like
Right.
that's another key part of it. Like it's a lot of those kinds of things that really kind of strike hard at I don't want to say the human soul, but the human psyche, I guess, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because our ability to thrive and survive stems from our ability to utilize our intelligence over everything else in the world. That's why we are the alpha species of the planet, right? Is because we're not stronger than a lion, we're smarter than a lion. That's our key. So the trick to intelligence is having all of the or as much of the information of the puzzle as possible to
Yeah.
figure out how to do it. Oh, a lion is stronger than me? Okay, but I can put up a fence, or I can shoot him, or I can just not live in Africa. Like, there's a million different
Yeah.
fucking
Right.
things,
Right.
but, you know, an ostrich doesn't think about those things. An ostrich says, oh shit, there's not a lion, I gotta run. Like,
Yeah.
that's the extent of it. So, the mystery, the lack of information is usually what strikes the human fear genes the most. And so for me as an artist, I wanted to ask you this question and talk about this today because, you know, obviously I love writing horror stuff. I'm curious to know for you, have you ever had like an inclination as a storyteller to lean into any kind of like horror storytelling? Because from my experience with you, most of your stuff is more comedically fantasy
Yeah.
driven type stuff. And I'm curious to know if you've ever had that inkling to, because I know me personally, I like to delve into all kinds of different
Right.
genres, and I'm curious to know for you if that's ever been like a tingle on the back of your neck, like, ooh, I'd like to tell a spooky story, or
I just don't know if I'd be any good at it. Like, it's never occurred to me to write a scary story.
hmm,
It's just not something that it may just be like neurologically my mind just doesn't function like that.
hmm,
I just don't. It's not something that I've really ever thought about too much.
yeah,
Um, and I'm really honestly, I haven't really been getting into watching anything that would be considered like a horror movie until more recently in the last couple of years. So like, I mean, other than like The Exorcist or The Omen, like that, or Alien, like those are pretty much my only real exposure to like horror movies, you know? And so, the more, I mean, I think the more that I've seen horror movies, the more that I would be kind of interested into writing like the trashy, cheesy kind of horror movies where it's more about
ah,
sort of spectacle than it is about like actually being scary. Um, just because there is something kind of fun about that kind of storytelling.
see, and I think you would be good to that for that because that to me, and I've said this all the time. I get into arguments with people about this online. There is no such thing in my mind as a horror comedy. There's only comedy or
Yeah,
horror. Like those,
right.
like they could. It's oil and water. You can try and shake it up, but as soon as it settles, you're gonna realize it's two different things.
Yeah,
Only one of them rises to the top, and I get into that fight with people because, and I'm not accusing you of this, but I accuse a lot of people of this. They take an easy road where they don't know, like you said, if they could do it, like the horror thing, and they know that they can make people laugh by doing bad. So like,
yeah.
I think they dubbed the Red Letter Media movie Space Cop as this new genre. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. I think we wanted to talk about this at one point. Maybe we have already, but the genre is called bad as form. Like that's the form is bad.
Yeah.
Intentionally bad.
There's a couple. I mean, Red Letter Media isn't the only one who. Before them, I'm trying to remember what the name of the crew who did these movies. There's a movie called Lost Skeleton of
Of
Cadabra.
Cadavra. I remember Joker showed us that. I was about to bring that up myself. That's
They've
actually a
done.
good movie though.
It is a legitimately good, but it is bad as a form, right? Like it
True.
is the idea of we're going to make we're going to make a 1950s style B movie,
Yeah.
you know, and they do it pretty much exact, you know.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, absolutely.
I just watched it actually like this week, and I kind of do. I like my Halloween time becomes my annual viewing of like bad B movies and
Mm.
like and then stuff like Rocky Horror Picture Show and Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, and so I watched it recently, and it's actually like an incredible amount of effort to be able to capture that kind of
Yeah.
form because you have to think very specifically about like, okay, what makes this funny
Right.
and how do I replicate it in a way that it seems at least sort of authentic? Like
Yeah.
you can't, a lot of times that kind of stuff you can't fake it because it
Mm.
does kind of, a lot of B movies kind of comes out of this authenticity where you're not really aware of what you're doing wrong, so you just do what you think is right.
Yeah.
Uh, Neil Breen, by the way, has announced that he is done filming his newest movie. I'm so excited.
I knew you would be. I saw that too. Um, that's one of the reasons why. But see, like, very often than not, most recent bad as form doesn't seem to work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Some of the older ones from like the early 2000s seem to get it right. Things like it's almost like there's two different forms where people do it as bad as form and parody of bad as form. And to me, the parody as bad as form works. So like Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, Return of the Killer Tomatoes, those
Yeah.
kinds of movies to me are parodying bad movies.
Yeah.
And that's why they seem to work as opposed to replicating the magic. Because if you watch Troll 2, they weren't trying to make a bad movie. You
Yeah,
know what
they're
I
just
mean?
trying to make a horror movie.
There's
Yeah.
a sincerity though
Yeah.
where you can examine as an audience member, you examine what's happening and you're like, I see what they were trying to do,
Yeah.
and I also see how far they missed the target, and that's why it's funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
It's
mean
like
I have to give it to the director for Troll 2 because it's kind of ambitious to try and write like a family horror movie. Like nobody's really tried that, and he was like, "Well, I will."
and that's, that's applicable because if somebody, okay, if you're throwing axes at a target, right, and someone is trying really hard and they throw it and it hits a tree 40 feet away, that's
Yeah.
funny because they were trying to hit the target. If
Yeah.
somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to try and hit that tree that's 40 feet away because it'll be not hitting the target," that'll be funny. It loses all of the funny aspect of it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I don't know how to describe it, but I mean, it is kind of like a judgmental form of comedy where you're just making fun of the massive failure. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, there's something to be said about the comedy of insincerity or sincerity, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Sure. Sure.
And I feel like the baddest form doesn't understand that, and that's why
Yeah.
it's not funny,
Well,
it's not
that's.
scary, it's just boring.
I know that I probably talked about this a bunch of times in the show, but that's part of the reason why I like a lot of. Obviously not all, but why I like a lot of B movies is what makes them so interesting to me is that sincerity aspect.
Right,
Is that
absolutely.
aspect of like, like Ed Wood totally wrote the script for Plan 9 from Outer Space and thought in his mind like this is genius.
Right.
Like the idea of aliens coming from outer space trying to prove to us that they're real by animating the dead, as opposed to just walking out of their fucking flying saucers. Like
Right.
that to me is really funny because it's like I think back to myself when I was in middle school and I was like, oh, I kind of wrote that way in middle school. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's what appeals to me about a lot of that stuff is it's a lot of times it's artists who haven't hit certain levels in their their maturing process,
Hmm.
and they kind of just stick to that like adolescent phase where they just let everything go
Yeah.
and they're not filtering, they're not pruning, they're not like going back and saying, but how would somebody actually view that? Like they haven't
Yeah.
developed that skill of being able to see it from an outside perspective, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that it's almost like it takes a certain skill to remove that objective third person perspective to just look at it as the adolescent perspective again as an adult. Like that's where that I think that's why it's so interesting to me.
I mean, I can't say that I didn't write a terrible horror movie script when I was in middle school about an evil Santa Claus because a devil cult um, stole the naughty or nice list and cursed it and like put all of their enemies. This was after Columbine. All of their enemies on the naughty list, and Santa Claus was murdering all of the naughty list. And I thought it was the greatest fucking thing because it made sense. It didn't. I didn't. I never once stopped to question whether or not it was good. I just thought, does this make sense? And then I thought about, all the cool kills. Oh, you can kill somebody by, hanging them in Christmas lights and doing all this kind of crazy shit, which That sounds like fun. I don't know if you saw the trailer. Did you see the trailer for that new David Harbour movie, Violent Night?
No, I haven't
Oh
seen
my
it.
God, you need to fucking watch this trailer. When we get done with this podcast, you're gonna stay on Skype with me.
All
You're gonna
right.
watch that trailer, and I'm gonna get to watch your live reaction to it. But you know, there's a lack of worldview where you know what I mean, like, and you don't. That's one of the key things about growing up. We're talking about fear and all that kind of stuff. Is experience things, and one of the things that you experience as you grow up is watching how other people react to things that differs from
Yeah.
your own. So you don't have that kind of taste, you know what I mean, that diversity in um, how other people will react. You just think, oh, this works for me right now, boom, done. But anyway, we are way off topic, so we might just end up wrap up early, or we might just wrap up early because I want you to watch this trailer and I'm fucking dying to see your reaction. Um, so that's kind of what scares us. I'm gonna wrap up this since we're only doing this one spooky particular episode this month. I'm sorry we let you guys down, but we were just way too busy. It didn't work out in the cards. I'm gonna drop a recommendation or two for our listeners uh, for spooky season things to watch. So, in case you haven't been listening to us the last couple months, I impressed upon Rainwater to watch Midnight Mass. It is a series on Netflix, which I think is like top shelf horror. Not elevated horror, top shelf horror, like the good shit. So please check that out. I would check out the mini series that was kind of influential on it called Salem's Lot. That's available. It's from 1979 by Toby Hooper. I was going to do a Haunted Home Theater on it, and I never did. But it is middle of the road most of the time, but it's got some really good scares that really kind of back it up after that. Um, a movie that I think that gets severely underrated. The ending is dog shit, but the majority of the movie, the reason why you go is to get scared. But I like a movie called The Last Exorcism, which is a Blair Witch style movie. It's kind of like Blair Witch meets The Exorcist, and it's really interesting and well done for the most part. The ending is such a cop out, but it's definitely a movie that I don't watch after 9 p.m. And that's that's saying something for me. Rainwater, did you have any kind of spooky media that you might want to recommend to
Oh
anybody to
man, it's
check
all
out?
trash.
Well, no, no,
Like,
no, but that's fine though. If it, you know, Halloween is 50% horror, 50% trashy,
sure,
right?
yeah,
Look
yeah,
at
yeah,
fucking half of the costumes, like,
yeah.
like
No,
in
I
most of.
actually, I would actually recommend seeing Smile. It was a pretty decent horror flick.
I'm
It's
shocked
actually,
that you said that because I've heard decent things. I've seen the box office numbers on it, which have blown my mind. So I'm actually kind of intrigued to go see it now
yeah.
because you're kind of co-signing it a little.
Well, like I said, like I actually had some moments watching that movie where I was like, oh, that's actually pretty scary. Like it's very cerebral. It's
Okay.
kind of the ending's not that great. There are certain aspects of it where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a horror movie, but like
Yeah.
overall, I would recommend watching it if you want a good, creepy sort of seep into your bones sort of horror movie.
I have a question. I have $1 million question. The answer is probably going to be no. But did you, by any chance, watch Halloween Ends?
I haven't watched it yet.
That is a podcast episode if I ever saw one. Um, and I don't know. I don't have time. I don't know. Do you have time Tuesday night to do an episode?
Um, I maybe,
Okay.
possibly, yeah.
We'll figure that out. But if we do, we might do a. I might try and have you watch Halloween Ends, and then we can talk about it. Because have you seen the two most recent Halloween movies?
I watched the first one. I didn't watch Halloween Kills.
Okay, okay, that's you'd have to watch probably all three of them.
Okay.
Only because I don't know if you've heard anything about it, but the movie is a fucking left turn in a Last Jedi Bride of Frankenstein kind of way. It's such a departure from what you expect a Halloween movie to be about. Like it goes from these, you know what a Halloween movie like the expectation level is. It's like a slasher movie. Michael Myers creeps around, he stabs people, people die, and the people do stuff to either escape him or fight back. Right?
Yeah.
That's cookie cutter plot.
Right.
Fucking not no, that doesn't happen in Halloween Ends. They tack on an ending that's like that because they knew there would be fucking riots if they didn't. but I would say a good 85 to 90% of the movie is a character study on what makes evil. And no spoiler, I'm not trying to spoil anything for you, but Michael Myers is probably in this movie 10% of the time.
Okay, not a lot at all.
Not a lot of time, not a lot of Myers time. It's really minimal. So it's very, and I would very much be looking forward to uh, your critique of it. But you'd have to watch the other two for the context of the discussion. So I don't know if we'll have enough time to do.
Oh, I'm actually another movie I want to recommend is one that you don't like, but I watched it recently. I did like it, which is Hellraiser 1. The first Hellraiser is pretty good, I thought. And it's a good, like, it's not like scary, but it's creepy. And it's kind of I don't know, for people who are into Lovecraftian horror, I would recommend it because it has a good thematic sort of thing going with it. That would be the other one that I would recommend.
I don't hate that movie for the record.
Okay.
I just don't care for it. There's a difference.
Yeah.
Like I can respect it for what it is. It's just not my cup of tea.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of things where I could say that is a well done movie. I don't find any personal value in it. Like and I think a lot of that is like I have a not a stigma, but it's a sticking point for me to watch people get like skinned and like be like just like their tendons and shit like that. So yeah, like that kind of stuff gets under my skin in a not in a horrifying. Well, I guess it is horrifying, but yeah, it's horrifying. Yeah, it is because it bothers me. It's to the point where I don't know what I would do in that situation, and I don't want to think. I don't. That's really what scares me about that is I don't want to think about how I would get through that situation. Do you know what I'm saying?
And that's totally the way that those movies are written too, because it's like you basically encounter interdimensional beings that are beyond your comprehension kind of thing, which is why I say it's very Lovecraftian. It's this whole notion of, what happens when you get into a situation where there's literally nothing you can do.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Save yourself.
I don't like that. That's I'm I guess that goes back to that Star Trek thing, right? What is it? It's the test that Kirk cheats.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. The Kobayashi Maru.
Maru. Yeah, it's that situation. I'm Captain Kirk. I don't believe in no win.
You'll just cheat.
I will cheat to fucking survive. Absolutely. Who the fuck wouldn't? You tell me I gotta play by the rules and the rules say I die? No. I'm gonna try to figure out a way around this. All right, we're coming up on an hour. We'll wrap it up. Thank you everybody for tuning in. If we get a chance, we are gonna try and knock out one more extra spooky season podcast for this month. But if not, we will see you next week with something normal. I think I had something written down. I think it's in our text thread. But I think it was a good idea. It was something we hadn't talked about.
It was I'm gonna act like I knew what it was, but I actually don't. It's something like the art of ethics or something.
Yeah, ethics in art.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something I really want to talk about because I think that's an important thing with the political, the election coming up here in the United States. If we have any international listeners, early November is usually when we hold our all of our elections, unless it's a special election.
I might go pretty hard on that episode actually.
That's fine. No. I think it's important because I think a lot of artists are very politically engaged or socially engaged people, and I want to have a discussion, because of our viewpoints and stuff about what our responsibilities are as artists when doing stuff like that, or even just in general when tackling anything. So, like you said, you talked about Smile being a horror movie, but it was also, one of the thematic premises was about mental health. Yeah. So there's an ethical thing that the artist has to face when they're crafting that. So I want to get into that discussion. That might be one that we'll be able to revisit several times as we go forward. But that's definitely on the to-do list. So stay tuned for that, folks. That's definitely coming. Otherwise, we will see you later. Bye.
Later, y'all.